Hi, up late again and thought I would take a little bit of my insomnia and direct it towards the kind of infinite and knee-jerk processes that I ran into. One of the things that I've commented in my previous video is, I've already covered the straw man, the trifecta of an argument ad nauseam, a straw man argument, and an argument to an appeal to emotion. None of these are really intellectually valid, um, and so I'm pretty much going to leave that aside. I'm going to go a little bit forward in Ben's video and deal with a quote that he says, and I'm going to probably edit this and put this up, but and he says, quote, "As finite beings, we literally can't contemplate the finite. As finite beings, we literally can't contemplate the infinite. We may know the basic idea, but only an infinite being with literal infinite conceptions of things would be able to be held accountable for their actions in a just court." I'm going to leave that up because there's a ton of presupposition and questionable logic in that statement. Let's begin. I'm going to begin at the beginning, and I hope I don't run out of time because there's just so much packed in there that is built on really questionable grounds, like some philosophical assumptions that don't make any sense. The first argument I would say is an argument of limited dimensions, right? He's talking about, say, a point on a number line. You have a point versus the number line itself, which is infinite. You can go into mathematical theory that there's even an infinite number of points between any two given points, but because you can subdivide it infinitely, this kind of a thing. And so the fundamental argument to reduce it to absurdum is you can't hold me responsible because I don't have the ability to understand that. You can't hold me responsible for it. The assumption, there's a couple assumptions. One is that if you notice, the entirety of the culpability depends on the infinite, the finite thing. And to put a finite thing, I drew some pictures. Now we're gonna pretend this beat up old whiteboard is two-dimensional, right? And so I have some two-dimensional people. I'm a three-dimensional being. I exist extra-dimensionally to them. If they thought and perceived in the little 2D world, they couldn't grasp the depth of my reality. So the argument then is because they can't intellectually step out into my extra dimensions, that I can't hold them responsible according to my standards. Now, the reason I'm using the whiteboard is because it's really simple to disprove this theory, and it's because this argument depends on and actually most liberal atheist arguments depend on mankind being the center of the universe, even though they'll scream loudly about that. It fundamentally comes back to that. For example, many of the arguments are because something doesn't make sense to human reason, or something is not, isn't perceptible by modern human reason, therefore it must not exist. The presupposition is that that modern human reason, A, can understand, and B, must be able to rationalize all that exists, so that anything that doesn't fit into those subsets of what can be perceived and rationalized by this particular set of organisms on this ball of rock must not be part of reality. So you see the catch here, right? Already in arguing how there is no higher purpose, you're arguing for mankind being the greatest purpose. You're arguing for mankind being the greatest intellect by saying what doesn't fit inside our intellect cannot be real. Get over yourself. If you really believe in evolution, then from a cosmic perspective, there's not a terrible qualitative or quantitative difference between the human brain and a patch of slime mold in terms of multiple galaxies, potentially infinite universes, if you really want to get into some of the less justifiable quantum mechanical arguments here. You don't matter, and you're not that big. So to assume that everything that exists can fit in your head is arrogant as hell. Stop it. That's not going to fly with me. I mean, you can believe it, that's fine, but don't throw it as me in an argument and expect me to swallow it, because I can think through what you're claiming and what you require. So, to go back to our little two-dimensional people, and this actually goes back to the authority of Scripture. What this argument, that, oh, my little flat people can't understand me who's got depth, therefore they can't be held, I can't hold them accountable for my understanding. All of this depends on human effort, human understanding, and human will. What it doesn't depend on is my ability to take this marker, another three-dimensional interaction, and to apply my multidimensionality to their limited dimensionality on their plane, right? So I can establish a norm. I can establish a line. And this line, assuming they have the ability to perceive one another, because it's on their plane, it's within their dimensions, is perceptible to them. I have the power, by reaching down into this limited dimension, to make distinctions. I can I can interact, I can condescend, literally, to a lower dimension. Now, let's assume that your argument is, valid that they can't perceive outside of their dimension or conceive outside of their dimension. It doesn't matter if the higher dimension has the ability to interact deliberately to descend to the lower dimension in the paradigm of the lower dimension. Okay? You want to talk about, you've heard the religious argument, the Unitarian argument that we're all like blind men grasping at an elephant. And somebody grabs an ear and says, well, God's like this. And somebody grabs the trunk and says, well, God's like this. And somebody grabs one of the little backer parts of the elephant and says, God is like this, and he smells really bad. And that this is why we all should just get along, because we all just imperfectly. That works great if the elephant can't talk, can't speak English, and can't say, no, idiot, you've grabbed my ear. Here, let me tell you what I'm really like. This is what Scripture is. It is, I will tell you what I'm really like. To address this, God's Word makes the specific claim that it is the condescension of the infinite to the finite. It is revealing what must be known. Now, I perhaps cannot explain everything here to them, but even within the Gospel of John, it says, Jesus did and said many other things, but we're recording what is necessary for you to believe, right? I can record for them, I can interact on their plane, being extra dimensional, things relevant to their plane. In addition, being outside of their plane, I can perceive things in ways that they can't. So if there's a differentiation between what you argue is the finite consciousness of humanity and the infinite consciousness of God, all of the weight and credit has to go to the extra dimensional, not the finite. Not the finite. No. You're arguing. All right, calming down again. You are you're saying basically. You simultaneously say God is so infinite we can't understand him, and then you want to limit him more than you would limit another human being by saying, and he has no ability or desire to communicate. Or if he communicates, he has no ability to do it effectively. God can't speak English. God can't inspire a word or preserve a word that has been inspired to the point where it can be reliable. God can't possibly, if this God character had created people, there's no way that he, having designed them for the molecules up, would understand how they function in such a way as to manipulate that function to produce a desired result. Why, that would be like someone who built a car understanding how the gas and the brake pedal went. Obviously preposterous, therefore there must be no engineer for my Audi. And this qualifies as a logical argument for you. Alright, I'm unimpressed. Moving on to the second part of your statement here. We may know the basic idea, but only infinite being with literal infinite but only an infinite being with literal infinite conceptions of things would be able to be held that accountable for their actions in a just court. Well, no, I may not. For, I'm going to get to your just court idea in just a second. Ha, see what I did there? Now, I may not hold these people. Now, if I have interacted on their dimension, I've reached down, I've drawn a box on their plane. The box exists on their plane, they exist within the box. Their job is to not go outside the box. Two of them go outside the box. Now, if I hold them accountable for whether or not they have typed on my three-dimensional keyboard to watch Netflix, then yeah, that's unjust. If I'm holding them accountable only to what I have revealed to them, only to what I have said to them, only what I have explained within their ability to conceive of something, then I'm not arguing in an unjust paradigm or an unfair paradigm. I'm only holding them responsible to what I have expected them to understand and what I have clearly condescended to their limited dimensionality to explain. This isn't really hard. It isn't really, it isn't really difficult, and it isn't really mind-boggling. So I don't know why this doesn't occur to you, but this is one of those presuppositions of this statement that I can't get behind because I have a whiteboard and I can use it and interact with it to test the interrelatedness of multiple dimensions, which is what you're talking about when you're talking about the finite and the infinite. You're talking about multiple dimensions, right? God, in His Word, holds us accountable to the truth He revealed in a way that is comprehensible. God is able to communicate clearly. Among other things, He became one of us, and He spoke our language, and it was witnessed by multiple people, and the witnesses agree by the standards of their age. Okay, so that's kind of where I stand on nope and nope. But finally, you said something really interesting. You said be held accountable for their actions in a just court. Just, which is from the Latin jus or justus, meaning according to the law or not guilty in front of the law. But the very phrase you're using to describe the proper proper application of condemnation and acquittal depends upon and presupposes the existence of a law. I haven't heard you actually propose a law, right? I haven't heard a positive instruction. I've only heard you, snarl and attack what exists. But unless you can provide an absolute, the standard by which we can judge, or unless you want to play with tautologies, you want to throw out our oxymorons, you want to show out self-contradictory statements that don't obey the law of an internal agreement, like there is no absolute truth. I absolutely believe that. That's true. You're too smart, and I've already been through kindergarten. So deal with something a little more palatable, please. You can't describe something as just unless there is a standard of justice by which you can measure it. You cannot normalize an activity as acceptable or unacceptable without a societal norm, without an absolute or a higher standard to which is applied. And you haven't supplied it. You're really good at trying to tear down something else, but I haven't heard you build something affirmatively up. And let's see how your positions have withstood anything. It doesn't exist. You haven't put it forward. And until you actually try to until you've built a sandcastle, why don't you leave the guy who built the Empire State Building alone? And furthermore, your argument, the final point, and I want to touch on this again, your justification for the acquittal of the human race is that they can't understand God, right? They can't fully understand the infinite. Well, if you, being a subset of the human race, being therefore finite, cannot literally contemplate the infinite, what the hell qualifies you to sit in judgment of what you yourself state you can't comprehend? instead of accepting accepting what has been condescended to reveal to you, what has been judged to be relative, you have to then sit. Before you can make that claim, you had to put your intellect above the infinite. All infinite, everything that it encodes, how it has to react to the universe, that has to fit in Ben's head. How arrogant is that? Now, it would be harder to submit to an absolute truth that's being revealed. It would be more difficult to say, well, there's an infinite and I'm finite. There is something greater than me and I am less than me. And so if there is a difference in how I perceive right and wrong and how that, how the infinite has perceived right and wrong, the presupposition of accuracy goes to the infinite and not the finite. I mean, like one of my little two-dimensional people, judging whether or not I've gained or lost weight. It doesn't, by how thick I am. It doesn't exist in their. It doesn't exist in their universe. They can't grasp it. So you yourself are arguing that there's more to any God than you could possibly understand. Then I submit to you, you are poor. You are completely inadequate to judge, to sit in judgment over what you have yourself admitted you can't understand. You're refuting your own ability to make these rants. Oh, sure, you can make them. You're refuting the validity of these rants. But, humility before the divine, that's something you've abandoned, and that makes me very sad. All right, so that's just how long it takes to unpack all the presuppositions and crappy logic in 2 sentences. 2 sentences. And you've given me 15 minutes of really fast talking to deal with. If I didn't have other things to do this weekend, I could maybe get through it. But here's, part 2. And again, just going forward to your next statement that isn't built on an ad nauseum, isn't a straw dog argument, isn't an appeal to emotional association built on a straw dog argument, which was your opening. And you still want me to treat you like you're being intellectually reasonable. All right. So there's part 2.